have established. But they're sort of pivotal foundational articles that the literature that we're looking at really, really draws upon. And you can tell this by, if you're reading the articles that you have, you might find that there is frequent reference to some kind of outlying article that was published, for example, a long time ago or done in a time that's outside of our search. So I'll give you an example. A study that I did that, again, I talked about this week 1 of class, that I did on the biobehavioral states of kids with severe disabilities. Those biobehavioral state definitions are actually drawn from infant research that was done in the 1960s. So there was across the literature I examined, although I was looking, at literature between 1990 and 2001, 2002, there was always this reference to this Brazelton article that was published in the 1960s. Well, it was referenced enough that I knew that I had to go back and find that, because it was obvious that the literature that I was looking at was really drawing upon the definitions and the work that was done in that article, and I needed to see what that was about. So if you find when you're looking at your literature that there is an article that may not necessarily fall into the bounds of your search, but it's being referred to over and over again, you really do need to go and find it. Another good test to see if you have enough literature is what I call a reference list test for satiation of the literature. And what it means is to take a few reference lists from the articles that you've looked at and look at the reference list, because if you look at enough of them, you should start to see patterns and start to be able to say in your mind, I looked at that one, or that one doesn't apply to me, or yes, I have that one, and I have that one, and I looked at that one, and it doesn't apply. And if you can go through 2 or 3 of these reference lists and really be familiar with the articles that are on those reference lists, this is a pretty good indication that you've satiated the literature, that you really have done a good search, and that you have pretty much all that you need to begin to write your review. So documenting the literature search. I just talked you through how to search the literature, but it's very important when you're writing your review to document the exact search procedures that you use to find your literature. These need to be documented in your review, and they're usually done in the introduction. If you stop and pause and click on links 1 and 2 on the side of your screen, you will see that those 2 literature reviews highlight exactly the databases that they looked at, the key words, how the search was bounded, the criteria for the inclusion in the articles. All of those things are sort of highlighted in those articles' intros. For link number 1, it's on page 4 of the PDF. It's under the Methods heading. And for the second one, link 2, it's on page 140 of the article itself, or you can do, it's page 3 of the PDF, and it's under the Procedures heading. Both of those sections are highlighted, so you can take a look at that and see how the authors put forth how they search the literature. So that's an important thing to do. Now you found all of your literature, and you're going to begin thinking about how you're going to put your literature together in your own review. This is really hard to do if you're dealing with 10, 15, 20 articles. So one good tool that you can use to organize the literature is a literature matrix. I invite you to stop here, pause the presentation, and click on link number 4 to the side of the page. That is actually a literature review matrix that I put together for a literature review that I wrote on treatments or interventions for pica. Pica is a behavior that is found in kids with disabilities, and it involves the eating of non-edible items, which can be dangerous. Kids eat things like pencils and batteries and excrement and dirt and all kinds of things, which obviously is something that needs to be intervened on. So I examined the literature to determine what are interventions that have been done on interventions for pica. As you can see, there's a number of categories across the pages of that matrix. But what I did was take each article and break it down into some major headings. And if you look on this slide, possible categories would be to list the source, the type of study, what participants were used, where the research was done, what setting was it, research questions, independent variables, dependent variables, data collection procedures, study design, how data analysis was done, the results, the strengths, and the limitations of it. So these are all ways that you can organize the literature that you're reading so that when you're writing, you're not having to deal with massive piles of paper, but you have this matrix that you're working off of that will be able to help you outline and write your review pretty in a pretty streamlined and efficient manner. So how do we evaluate the literature that we have? Again, if you look at the links 1 and 2 to the side of your screen, all literature reviews, as part of what they do, they address the overall strengths and limitation of the literature being examined. This involves looking across the individual investigations to find strengths and limitations that recur in the articles, across the articles, or have special prominence. So if you pause and click on links 1 and 2, under the discussion headings of both of those articles, for link number 1, it's page 9 of the PDF, and again under the discussion heading. On link number 2, it's on page 144 or page 7 of the PDF under discussion. Both of those literature reviews are going to talk about the strengths and the literature of all and the limitations of all the literature that they're examining in the review. So this is a really important section that you need to make sure that you are discussing and incorporating into the review that you do. When you're evaluating the literature, there's sort of 2 levels that you can think about. Level 1 is a more basic evaluation, and it involves looking at the applicability of the literature. So some questions that you might ask as you're reading a specific article are, what about the population? Can the investigation's results be generalized across a wide range of individuals? Or is it a pretty narrow population that they're looking at, and that generalization is not necessarily possible? Another thing to look at is the setting. Was the investigation conducted in an applied setting, so that it looks like we might be able to do it in an applied setting as well, or was that setting more controlled and segregated? Intensity of procedures is something to think about. Would the procedures that they're outlining, the interventions that they're doing, would it be doable to try to implement the investigations procedures in your own classroom or in your own practice? Are they interventions that the average man on the ground can do, or do they involve an unusual amount of training, knowledge, time, manpower to be successful, which would make it really difficult for a typical practitioner to try and replicate? Some other questions to ask if you're thinking about just a level 1 evaluation of the articles that you're reading. Question about training. How well trained are the implementers of the investigation procedures? Again, are these doctoral students or researchers with several tens and hundreds of years of experience behind them, or is a typical teacher going to be able to do this? How doable is it to provide the same training, if there is any specialized training, in a real world situation? Can you do it in a day or two, or in an hour or two, or does the implementer need to go to extensive training over a long period of time? Because that would be a drawback to, again, implementation in a more typical classroom setting. Intervention is another general area to look at. Is the intervention being applied in the investigation? Is it age appropriate? Is it respectful of and meaningful to the participants? Because we want to capitalize and use those kinds of things in our own practice. If it looks like those things aren't being addressed, that would be a red flag and something that would cause one to take some pause in thinking about applying that same intervention to their own classroom. A second level of analysis is a more detailed, researchy way to look at the articles for review, and it has to do with how well the experimental design was done. So the big umbrella term for this is how well the investigation in question controls for threats to internal and external validity. Essentially what this means is how well is the investigation structured so that you can make sure that the intervention or what's being done and the results obtained from what's being done can be attributed directly to that intervention and not anything else. And then how well can those results be generalized to a different population or to a more applied setting. So that has to do with internal and external validity. Our session, class session 3, is going to discuss internal and external validity in great detail. So I just want you to be aware of these issues here for the purpose of this tutorial, knowing that you're going to get much more information on this in week 3. We're going to talk about definitions of different kinds of internal and external validity, talk about examples, and I will put those up on your course-related materials for you to refer to as well. A final thing, a final aspect that one wants to think about when writing a literature review is not only addressing the strengths and limitations of the literature, but also putting forth implications for future research efforts. Again, pausing, clicking on links 1 and 2 to the side of your screen. If you go to the end in the discussion sections of those 2 literature reviews, you're going to see they discuss the strengths and the limitations, as well as what does this mean for future research. What kind of considerations do researchers who are going to do new studies need to think about in designing new research efforts. So again, when you're writing a review, implications is definitely a topic that you're going to want to address in the conclusion. So we talked about some of the big parts of a literature review, how it's structured, how to go about searching the literature, how to start thinking about strengths, limitations, and implications of it. Now we're going to talk a little bit about writing the review. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is do an introduction. Again, clicking on the examples 1 and 2 to the side of your screen, you're going to find their introductions being put together. As you see, there are a number of passages for both of those links that are highlighted in yellow, and you'll see kind of a little conversation note above those highlights. If you click on that, you're going to find a comment pop up. And looking at the introduction, you can look at those comments. They're going to give you an idea of how those introductions are put together. But broadly stated, the parts of the introductions that you're going to see is just a general statement of the problem. Autism has people with autism have a lot of sensory issues, for example. Okay, and then the difficulties arising from or the importance of the problem. Why is it important for us to know about this problem? And then possible solutions to the problem as explored in the literature. So that's generally what an introduction is going to do, to sort of set up the topic at hand that you're going to look at. In addition to the introduction, some other considerations that you need to think about when writing the whole review are these. These are drawing, the bullets that I'm going to talk about right now are drawing upon APA formatting to a large degree. We talked about APA, we talked about the fact that manuals are available in the library, that there are references available online, and I would encourage you to click on the link at the side of your screen. That would be the third link it's the 5th link to the right of your screen. That's going to take you to a tutorial that the library has linked to its website on APA style. You can go through that whole tutorial. It'll give you an idea of some of the things to think about when using APA formatting. Some items that I would encourage you to pay close attention to are headings. Headings are ways of giving captions or dividing a larger paper into sections. Again, looking at the literature review on this tutorial, you can click. They're usually written in bold and are centered in some sections. They might be italicized or put to the right hand side of some of the sections, but there are 5 levels of headings depending on your paper. So looking at